Hi everyone, my name is José Vergara, and along with my colleagues at Swarthmore College, Mike Jones and Nabil Kashyap, today I'll be introducing you to the Reactor Room, an immersive Chernobyl exhibition. As I was developing a course on the Chernobyl nuclear disaster for spring 2020, Chernobyl, Nuclear Narratives in the Environment, I knew I wanted one of the assignments to be public-facing, to have students practice writing for a wider, non-academic audience. So in consultation with the librarians at McCabe Library and others, I came up with the idea of building a total installation inspired by the work of the Russian conceptualist artists Ilya and Amelia Kabakov. As you can see on the artist's website, these are multimedia art installations, spaces that you fully enter. They blend text, image, and 3D objects to render and create these new worlds that the audience is invited into. In our case, this would be a room built to look like the nuclear plant's actual control room, in which we would house several iPads featuring digital projects produced by my students. There would be sounds and visuals as well to go along with their text-based materials. And as you can see here on Google Images, there are many photographs and renderings of the nuclear plant that we could base our own design off of. When I first thought of the idea for what would ultimately become the reactor room, I knew it would be difficult to pull off, but of course I could not have foreseen the COVID-sized wrench that would be thrown into the plan. So we had to pivot. The physical room has been postponed until the fall semester, and instead we designed an extensive website for the exhibition. I encourage all of you to take some time to explore the website and the various kinds of projects that the students have put together. Given our time constraints, here we'll simply highlight 4 projects selected to show the range of topics and approaches that the students selected.
Hi folks, I'm Mike Jones from the Swarthmore College Language Center, Media Center, and Maker Space. I wanted to talk a little about the project itself before we show you the website's design and a few sample student projects. The project was something that we discussed as a group for classes started. So we had discussed the timeline, the requirements, the platforms that we wanted students to think about as they were considering the projects that they wanted to do. We needed students to understand the physical installation, how the projects would be displayed within that. We needed them to understand that there would be both digital and written components to this assignment. We went into class very early in the semester to talk about the concept and the goals and to introduce students to several of the tools that we thought might be useful, just so that they had some understanding of what kinds of materials they could use and how those might be displayed. Jose created a really detailed document in which he laid out all of the requirements for the project, as well as the timeline. The project was done in stages. Students submitted proposals and then drafts were reviewed by various folks, including peers, so that they were provided with a lot of feedback. The project required students to engage with digital media to reconsider how they can tell stories and share research. One of the vehicles for support is that we created several open lab hours where students were welcome but not required to come to discuss their ideas before they submitted a proposal, and again after they had submitted a proposal and received feedback on it. Those lab hours were unstructured, so we were just available to provide advice, feedback about tools they might use, materials they might consider. They started preparing their project. Often involved directing their thinking and linking kind of the tools to the concept of the story that they wanted to tell, and making them understand that they needed a strong thesis driving the project, much as you would if you were doing a paper.
So I'd like to briefly describe the site itself. If there's one thing that students cover in a semester about Chernobyl, it is how infrastructure and design are neither invisible nor insignificant. So in terms of the architecture, ultimately, the way the project site is structured is not unlike a physical exhibit. the intention is to separate sort of core documentation from more dynamic components. So with the physical exhibit, the walls, the wall text provide something of a physical and conceptual ground, something like a container for what might not otherwise be intended to endure. Likewise, this project exemplifies something that we've been trying out for a few years now, a stable, sort of uniform, sustainable skeleton with a bunch of metadata, giving way to the interactive features that may be compelling and exciting to navigate, but may not have any guarantee of being sort of archival or meeting web standards. Underlying the whole site is a piece of software called Jekyll, which, if you are familiar, is what's called a static site generator. The output of this is just pure HTML and CSS, and it stands sort of in opposition to something like an Omeka or WordPress, which are sort of full-blown content management systems. The result is that the site is much smaller, sustainable, and infinitely portable, and does not require a continuously running database or even a server for that matter. In our case, the site doesn't even live on a server and has much better performance internationally, which I kind of believe reflects some of the aims of the site. It also allows for a dizzying degree of flexibility, which was one of the key features we had originally envisioned. The course and the student contributions get at just how incredibly interconnected across disciplines, across geography, across time that the legacy of Chernobyl truly is. We took a risk to the extent that students can choose from a long list of platforms to create an interactive feature or choose their own platform. And to be honest, this is sort of what made me most nervous. Would we run into something that we just couldn't work with, or would be impossible to manage, or run into some technical issues that we were just unable to solve, leaving it open in this particular way? But in the end, I believe the flexibility paid off. So what happened was most students ended up choosing from a few platforms. So for example, ArcGIS story maps, or some of the tools offered by the Night Labs, including Story Map or Storyline and Timeline.js, in addition to creative uses of Hypothesis. And then at the same time, a few students showed sort of real creativity and didn't need a ton of support in choosing platforms with which I was completely unfamiliar. So interactive fiction platform called Texture, a feature called Data Wrapper that spoke to their projects much better than the usual menu of options. So what support can we offer with a project like this? With this many students, how do you assess and communicate to students what success looks like when there's such a range? Is it equitable for students with different needs? I believe we kind of came up with successful, if provisional, solutions to these concerns, but I don't believe that by any means that these are sort of settled issues. And so finally we come to design. Design for digital scholarship projects is an open question. On the one hand, we've all seen sites that once seemed cutting edge or at least current, that have since sunsetted or succumbed to link rot, that have aged gracefully, and some that should have had the plug pulled mercifully long ago. So this might be one argument for design standards, no matter how badly that one student wants to submit a paper in Comic Sans. But on the other hand, it has been my experience that one of the easiest ways to cultivate buy-in from students and even sometimes from faculty is to literally change the font. The time I spend attending to and differentiating the graphic design and typography, even though I'm no designer, often and counterintuitively contributes to a shared sense of ownership and investment. So I was very fortunate in this case to work with Susan Dreyer, Visual Initiatives and Exhibitions Librarian. She helped create design elements for the physical exhibit, which I then incorporated into the site. And everything from the font that was inspired by the television show Chernobyl's titling, created by the way by a German fan, to the photographs, and these were taken by Michael Rothbard, photojournalist and Swarthmore alum, who is sort of celebrated for his work documenting nuclear and other disasters. And the result, I think, is a strategy that feels particularly engaging to contributors and to visitors to the site, but on the other hand, one that is not so particular and not so fiddly that the site cannot sustain easy design revision archiving, or even like a migration of format entirely.
For this first project, Lucas used the online choose-your-own-adventure story builder Texture to examine thematic lines in Ukrainian poetry that has been inspired by the Chernobyl disaster. As you can see, audience members are tasked with following a certain path until the game opens up and lets you make connections between poems we read in class, as well as some others that Lucas identified on his own. As he put it in an accompanying essay, this project aims to highlight the wave-like oscillation of words at once connecting poetry and Chernobyl by addressing the same concept, and pushing the two apart by showing a variety of different nuances to that meaning. In other words, it lets readers directly experience how these poems link together and contribute to the mythology of Chernobyl. We see patterns emerge and make them ourselves as we work through the game. Next we have Max's beautiful ArcGIS project close to home, Chernobyl's Berries in the US. Using various maps, photographs, and extensive research, Max demonstrates the long-lasting effects of Chernobyl's agricultural fallout. He shows that these effects were not limited to Eastern Europe, nor to the years immediately following the disaster in Ukraine. In fact, the passage of radioactive blueberries, one of the region's major exports into the US, is not an entirely uncommon occurrence. Max, I think very successfully, conveys the scale of the disaster using these mapping tools and images that take the reader around the world. Nicole's Chernobyl global news coverage is similar in that it compares how various countries reported on the disaster, but focuses on Chernobyl's immediate aftermath. Here, for example, Nicole puts headlines in front pages of newspapers from around the US, England, Ukraine, and Australia in dialogue with one another. She demonstrates quite effectively how the Soviet government prevented any real coverage of the disaster in newspapers. She then contrasts the lack of information with the spread of radioactive nuclides using this short video and simulation. Taking a more creative approach, Sky's Chernobyl Symphony uses samples from previously composed pieces of music and sounds associated with the disaster, Geiger counters, the voices of those involved to trace the plot of Chernobyl, from the calm sunny day that preceded the explosion to the cover-up and panic that ensued. The symphony is accompanied by an essay in which Sky considers what it means to represent Chernobyl through sound rather than word. The essay and music together speak to the emotional and existential questions that we've wrestled with throughout the semester. so the installation gave Sky an opportunity to put into practice what we had been studying. Through this exhibition, my students explored the possibilities of digital curation. In essence, I asked them to think about how we might present the course material to a public audience in a manner that is both widely accessible and academically rigorous. After the very positive reception HBO's Chernobyl miniseries received, it seemed to me that this was an excellent opportunity for students to use their newfound knowledge to further expand our understanding of this cultural phenomenon. The digital humanities, as embodied in this project, presented exciting tools for doing so. These various platforms that they selected required students to not only interact with and study text in ways that were perhaps unfamiliar to them, but then to also be able to convey that information in a meaningful way. Whether it was through an analysis of songs inspired by Chernobyl, an exploration of the conspiracy theories that the disaster generated, or a study of street art found in Pripyat, this interactive exhibition seeks to facilitate public engagement with the Chernobyl catastrophe and its associated mythology. In short, this installation challenged students to approach the history of Chernobyl in a novel way. They were able to develop their own research interests and to find the best means to share the particular Chernobyl narrative that they selected for themselves. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope you enjoy and learn from the Reactor Room. After you've had a chance to look around, please consider sharing your own response using this page, the response section, of our site.